Thank you, Program Director Comrade Malebu. Dumelang. Good morning to all. Let me greet Cynthia and the family. Kotani sitting next to you. Cynthia and the family. Kotani sitting next to you. The rest of the family. Deputy President Paul Mashatile, former President Mbeki, and Mutlanke. Comrades and friends, thank you very much. Like Dr. Mg before me, I want to express sincere appreciation to the family for the invitation to be here with you today. We gathered to take leave of the giant-hearted Mosioa Lekota. He was a giant heart in every respect, and when a giant heart leaves, it offers us an opportunity to reflect on their life, but also to peer into our collective hearts as a nation. One of the features of this funeral today is that the colors of so many political organizations are represented here, because in many respects, Mosioa Lekota was bigger than any political organization. There are people here from the BC movement that he was part of before the ANC, from COPE, from the PAC, from every conceivable political organization, because that was in the nature of his being. There were some things he didn't give up on. He was a buccaneer for life, but in political choice, he was able to move on. In fact, I know that he died a very happy man after the 3-0 drubbing of some team the weekend before his passing. But that was Trevor Lekota. That was him alive to every aspect of being Lekota. Part of what we understand about ourselves as a people is that South Africans have summoned up the courage to forgive those who perpetrated apartheid against us. But sometimes small political differences appear unresolvable, and I think Tera's life and experience was largely in contrast to that. The reality, of course, about everything he did was the force of his personality was bigger than any constraints it presented. He was but, as the Premier said, 24 when the Sasso trial started. He was released in 1982. And no sooner was he released, and I just want to correct something. He didn't join the UDF. He was part of the formation of the UDF from 1983. He was a builder, he was a visionary, he was determined in every possible way. And so, with the formalities of the UDF, you didn't properly need an election. Comrade Popo there was the General Secretary, and Trevor Lekota was the public face of the UDF. He took struggle into small towns in a way that previously had been quite unfashionable. But it's also important to remind ourselves that this life, he came out of prison in 1982 and was virtually immediately ready to take on the next challenge to build the UDF. No gap between. And we sometimes treat this in a very macho way. We say, well, it's like the rites of passage. It's just like going to initiation school, going to Robben Island, going to detention. The truth is something very different. You know, he wrote in that wonderful collection called Letters to My Daughter, every chapter starts with the words, my dearest Chabi, and every chapter ends with the words, your loving dad. But he writes in the introduction, during these years I realized how multifaceted the struggle is. We were not only subjected to hard labor, but also cut off from our families to such an extent that we became strangers to each other. Located on an island far away from our families, we had visits that were short, few and far between. Under those trying conditions, several families collapsed. We were fighting the struggle on a front we'd not previously anticipated. There were days when one preferred solitude, and I was no exception. On such days, I preferred to stay with my thoughts and feelings, but I always used to invite Chabi from the distant northern Natal country village of Ngutu, where she was raised by a grandmother, my mother-in-law. There's a depth of feeling that we sometimes gloss over in this need to be heroes. And Trevor was brave and bold enough to bring that through in the letters to Masachaba, who, as we heard earlier, predeceased him by all of 3 decades. That painful reminder from Comrade Trevor is that we mustn't be glib about who we are and where we come from. It takes a lot to advance struggle, but we must also remember that leaders are human beings and suffer from all the foibles and feebles that everybody else does. As publicity secretary of the UDF, he was indefatigable. He would get into a car and drive and stop in small towns and talk to people. He wasn't for the big cities and the rallies. He was happiest when he was amongst the people. And that was such a great hallmark. And if you look at the history of the UDF from 1983 August until July 85, when the first state of emergency was declared after the Craddock funeral, it was 23 months, but 23 intense months of building struggle, of taking it broadly. And you can't look at that period in the history of this country without understanding the strength, the determination, and the adrenaline of Trevor Lekota. He seemed to be driven by that adrenaline and big buckets of a fried chicken whose name I can't remember. But he went around like that across the length and breadth of the country. And we were very concerned. I'm sure Comrade Popo, if he had time, would tell you about how we battled to slow Trevor down. In this short period that he was out and publicity secretary of the UDF, he rolled 3 cars. And he rolled those cars, and there were periods of detention in between. He was going through cars at the rate of 1 every 9 months. But that was his determination, his energy, and he rushed from place to place and would get there and spend time with people and slowly listening to them and convincing them about struggle. And during this period, we laughed much. One of the features of Trevor Lekota, and you can see it in all the pictures, he laughed. He laughed loudly, he laughed with gusto, and he was a great raconteur who could repeat stories. There's a great gift that many of the people on Robben Island have, and that is to tell stories. And every time they tell the story again and again, you laugh anew. There's more energy in the story, and that was Trevor Lekota. But apart from the laughter, we were able to sit down and plot and plan and take responsibility for what we would do to bring down the apartheid regime. And he always reached out to people who were different from him. I think we all know that Trevor Lekota was at his happiest as a Mosotho, dressed in his blanket and hat, but he was more at home as well in reaching out to other people. When he became premier, there were some of these very recalcitrant Afrikaner farmers. He would pick up the phone and say, "Ek kom Sondag by jou braai." And if they say, "No, no, no," he'd say, "Ek kom." And that was the building of a non-racial presence in a part of the country that had not quite understood what that non-racialism was about. He conducted himself in this way. I'm saying he was the proudest Mosotho, happiest in his Kobo and his Mokoroto. The diversity of ourselves as a people was part of what shaped him. but he also didn't suffer fools. The Premier said we must tell all the stories, and there's an important story. When Trevor was Premier for a short 2 years, he was recalled because he wasn't going to suffer fools, and he went onto the radio and called out their bad behavior. He was loved because he was as honest as he was in all his interactions. And sometimes he was obstinate and he was difficult, but that didn't detract from the love that so many have had for him. The obstinacy was part of his charm. He would take offbeat positions on all manner of issues and then say, hey, okay, I'm sorry, I retract. But that was Trevor. I want to end this little tribute with a wonderful poem from the Chilean poet Pablo Neruda. It was a great poem, So Is My Life, speaks to how we knew Trevor. He writes, my duty moves along with my song. I am not, that is my destiny. I exist not if I cannot attend to the pain of those who suffer. They are my pains. For I cannot be without existing for all who are silent and oppressed. I come from the people and I sing for them. My poetry is song and punishment. I am told you belong to the darkness. Perhaps, but I walk to the light. I am the man of bread and fish, and you will not find me among books, but with women and men, they have taught me the infinite. Rest in peace, our dear comrade and friend. You'll be sorely missed. Thank you.